lot of search.
Good evening, everyone, and on behalf of the League of Women Voters Houston and Houston Media Source, I would like to welcome you to Public Affairs Public Access. My name is Rita Hicks, and I am very excited to be joining you tonight for this month's iteration of Public Affairs Public Access. Last month, we gave you a retrospective on what legislative session looked like in Texas this year. This episode, we're going prospective. We're looking forward to 2015 elections and very excited about some new partnerships the League of Women Voters of Houston has in order to really encourage people to get out to those polls for their 2015 municipal elections. I'd like to take just a moment to introduce the other people that I have at my table tonight. First, my co-chair of Debates and Forums for the League of Women Voters Houston, John Canales-Gorczynski. There's John.
Hello, Rita.
We also have two of the partners we'll be working with on these fantastic new projects with us tonight. They also both happen to be League of Women Voters Rising Stars. First, we have from January Advisors, Jeff Reichman.
Hi.
We also have from the Black Sheep Agency, Amy Woodall. Hi. So thanks so much, guys, for taking the time out tonight to come and talk to us. Now, remember, this is a call-in show, and if you have questions or comments about anything that you hear tonight, please feel free to give us a call. The number will be displayed on the screen. You're also welcome to tweet questions to me at Hicks426, and I'll be checking my phone to see if any of you have comments or questions. And also, please engage with us online. We're using the hashtag HughVote. Now, I have to tell you, all of us are here tonight because we all do something in the city, whether it's League of Women Voters, other civic organizations, a lot of other volunteering organizations, and we feel very strongly that in order to have a strong Houston, we need to have an engaged Houston.
That's right.
And the projects that we're working on tonight, we're going to be talking about several of them, brand new for the League of Women Voters this year, in addition to the programming that we typically do in an election cycle. So you'll still get your candidate conversations from the League of Women Voters. We'll be scheduling those soon. You'll still get vote411.org closer to election time to get information about the candidates in your particular races. But these projects are about getting people interested and getting people showing up to the polls and informed showing up to the polls about their races. So I want to jump right in and you know, first I want to hear just a little bit from each of Jeff and Amy. You know, what brought you to this project? What's your personal motivation for getting involved in campaigns to get out the vote? Amy first.
Oh, sure. So really, our agency is a cause-driven focus. We work with civic organizations, social impact organizations, and nonprofits to improve quality of life and help accelerate impact in the social space. And voter turnout is something that's really important to the future of our city, to moving along major issues. And if you look at the statistics with voter turnout in Houston, there are a lot of things I like to brag about with Houston, with our city. I'm so proud of our city. One of the things that I'm just not so proud of is our voter turnout. So I'm really here because I consider myself a liaison between the city. We work on a lot of civic projects and quality of life projects in Houston, and the people of Houston. We actually try to talk about our agency as the people's agency. Really driving messages home to the community, and voter turnout is one of the most important messages, one of the most important roles that we can play to be that liaison. So I'm here and showing up and invested in this because I care about the turnout and moving issues forward and giving people an opportunity to know and understand government and connect to government and realize that their voice matters and every vote matters, and in any way that we can do that. And I'd like to reinvent that, the way that we're looking at it a little bit.
And I've heard similar things from you, Jeff. So tell us why you're sitting here today, why we're having this conversation.
Well, I really believe in democracy. I think it's the best form of government, and we have a 13 to 20% voter turnout rate. I'm a data guy. Let me just say that first and foremost. So I might throw some numbers out there, but we have a 13 to 20% voter turnout rate, and that's a democracy that's on life support. And I think that it's really important for Houstonians to have a voice in who leads this $5.1 billion enterprise. 137,000 people choose who runs this city of 2.1 million people and all the people who come through it. It's so important that we show up to the polls and that we express what we care about so that the candidates can make those things a priority.
Yeah, absolutely. And John, and just for any of you at home who might not know, John is actually my new co-chair of Debates and Forums, and I'm absolutely thrilled to have him for this 2015 election cycle. This is really personal to you. Tell us about that.
Well, it's very personal to me, Rita. City elections have been a part of my life since I was born. My father served on the Houston City Council from 1980 to 1993, and I grew up in city politics. Not only was that interesting and exciting, and I got to meet a lot of people, but I really got to see the impact that local government had on people's lives. There are very few people that will ever meet the President of the United States relative to the size of this nation. There are a few people that will meet their senator. More people will meet their member of Congress. But if you don't have a personal relationship with your local elected official, it's time to get involved, because you can. They're accessible. They're people that live down your street. They are your neighbors, and they care deeply about the city. Whether you agree with them or disagree with them on every policy matter, it's important that you voice that. And I've watched elected officials listen and discern and make decisions for that long, and I think that it's time for people to understand, and especially young people who sort of see this political thing as something that happens in Washington, and then every 2 years something that happens in Austin. This is something that happens every week here in Houston, and the things that you rely on the most, in fact, are, sometimes can happen right here. So it's very real, and I love real. I love where you can see it. I love where you can actually watch the call that you made bring a city crew out to fix something, or you organizing your neighborhood to get services that you need. So it's something that I've loved, and at times have had a harder relationship because it's taken up so much of my family's time. But it's definitely something that I've watched be effective, and so I want it to be effective for everybody.
I think you said something that was really important there, and that has to do with accessibility, because so often we look at a ballot as a flat piece of paper and it's got names on it. Some people might not even pay attention to those names because they vote based on a particular party, based on a particular ideology. But the fact of the matter is, these decisions that affect our life every day are being made by people, and they are people that you should have a relationship with. And that's why one of our new programs this year that we are working on is a concept of accessibility, and we're still working on what to call it. Right now we're calling it open office hours, but the idea is for the League, in partnership with Black Sheep and January Advisors, to put together a forum in which anyone who wants to come and meet and interact with candidates for these offices that have an impact on our lives every day can come and actually interact with those people. And the idea is, one, it shows people, who the candidates are, gives them a chance to get to know them, what their ideology is, but really just reminding people, or maybe teaching them for the first time, that they're just people. They're people who care what you have to say, want to hear your opinions, want to make good decisions. And then on the flip side, we want to show candidates that people in the city really care. They want to voice their opinions. They want to be heard. So it's accessibility both ways.
Absolutely. And I think, we'd love to hear more about how the open office hours idea came about. But just to reiterate a point that you made, city elections and the elections that are coming up this year are nonpartisan. There's no relying on a political party to decide for you who it is you support. Now, a lot of people these days don't affiliate with one party or the other, and that's fine. But in these city elections that you're going to make a lot of important decisions for the mayor, city controller, the entire city council. These are elections that you're going to have to make a choice. You're going to have to decide, independent from anyone else, who you think is the best candidate. So with that, open office hours and an idea that, direct contact with citizens and voters and candidates Tell us a little bit more about how that idea came about.
Sure. Well, I think that it's instantly familiar to anybody who's gone to college, anybody who has worked in the startup community. It's an applicable idea that I think is used elsewhere, but in Houston, it's just another way of opening a door and making things accessible. And I think that Amy is really kind of the driving force behind that.
Well, I think that in our work, talking about city issues and different things that are really critical to the success and the future of Houston. We hear a lot of people in our interactions saying they don't know where to start with addressing an issue, or they're not political. They don't understand politics, or they don't want to have anything to do with politics. And I think the beauty of open office hours is that it's a person connecting with another person and bringing it down to the level to say, I'm here to talk about what's important to you, and to tell you what's important to me, and to have that conversation in the context of immediate response. I think that we can, like John said, with Washington, or even on the state level, or even on the local level, think, oh, that's our mayor, and I couldn't possibly have a connection with our mayor, which could not be more true. There are plenty of ways to access our local politicians and to have your voice heard and to express what you care about. And the biggest danger is that we don't make that very clear to people, and we don't give that access point, because then that trend will continue, and the gap will continue to grow, where it is just government moving farther away from people and individuals and in the community and what they care about. So open office hours is meant to be a very simple concept that just allows us to come together and gives people the opportunity to have those conversations.
I love the idea that it's very humanizing, because and especially with the news cycle, what it is, we have a tendency to either ivory tower our politicians or vilify our politicians without really thinking about, these are people, and they are in that position because they care. Mm-hmm. And we might not necessarily agree, but let's have that conversation, because sometimes people change their minds. It might be you, it might be you're elected, but if you're not having those conversations person to person, an actual conversation, not what you're, brave enough to put on social media when you think nobody's paying attention. I think that that's really important, and especially at the local level, because so many of the issues handled by city government are nonpartisan. It has to do with infrastructure. It has to do with schools. It has to do with making everybody's life on the day-to-day run better in the city, growing the city, making, improving the quality of life. And, those are issues that we all care about, and we ought to be talking to the people who represent us about.
They're also what makes our city great, or what makes what we decide our priorities are. When we say that Houston is a wonderful place to live and go to school and raise a family, or not have a family, this is a place that we can define for ourselves by coming together and participating in a lot of ways, and more in ways that we'll never be able to change the country or the state in the time that we would love to. Services that we want to see, the way that we want to define ourselves, can all be done at the city level, and there's no substitute for that, and there's no substitute for people stepping up and saying, this is the Houston I want, and this is how I think we can get it, but let's talk about it. I also think that something you said was really important, which is, if you never change your mind, that's a very clear indicator that you're probably doing politics wrong. If you never change your mind on something, if you never change your mind on an issue, then you're not engaging in the democracy, the people-powered government that we have, because otherwise, kings didn't have to change their mind. The king, decided that it was going to be one way or the other, it was going to be that way. Mm-hmm. But when you come together and you rule as a group and you rule by the people, then it requires us to change our mind. We have to. So getting people together during government is amazing, but getting people together before they go into government, which is the
Right.
idea behind open office hours, I think is wonderful.
I absolutely agree with that. Just to piggyback, I mean, being in the industry that I'm in, if you look at the Mad Men era, it was very much about this is the message that we're broadcasting out to you. And so the consumer landscape now, which transfers over into everything that we do, including how we think about government and elect a government and have, you know, an ongoing dialogue with the government, is that it can't just be one way. It has to be a conversation. And so I love this concept because from the beginning, it allows the consumer or the voter to participate in the process. And also, you know, consumers on social media and everything that we're doing right now, we're teaching brands that they can't just broadcast, that we expect to participate in the process, that we expect this to be a two-way conversation, that we expect to be heard, especially if you look at the airline industry and things like that. I mean, we expect to be able to give feedback and then to have the brand adapt. And I think that transfers right over into what we expect from our government. And this open office hours is a really great way for us to take ownership of teaching people who are running for office what we expect from them now before we'll vote for them. And then also that transfers right into office. We want to interact with you now. We want to have a conversation with you now, and then we want to have a conversation with you when you're in office, and that behavior just becomes natural once they transition in and are elected.
And what's really kind of subversive about the whole project, you wouldn't think that open office hours is a subversive thing, but candidates market to established voters, people who have voted in previous elections. And this doesn't square with that. This is maybe people who are new to Houston, maybe people who care about a particular issue and see it as a conduit because they followed Amy on Twitter or they followed Rita on Twitter. This is a way that candidates can address the other 87%, the people who might not have voted, but now they're going to. And in that regard, it throws a wrench into the established models.
Mm-hmm.
And just as someone who has worked professionally in politics, the absolute number one best predictor about whether or not someone will vote in an election is whether or not they voted before. And that is, there's limited resources and limited time. And when you're trying to talk to everyone that's going to go vote, because you have to get a majority of the people who show up, then that's where people are going to put their money and their time. If you say to yourself, I've never heard from a candidate before, ask yourself when the last time you voted was. I promise you that if you vote every single time, it might become overwhelming.
All those jury duty requests.
Yeah, well, fortunately, if you have a driver's license, you can get called in for jury duty. But the amount of engagement that you receive is going to be directly proportional to the amount you participate. Mm-hmm. Whether it's in person, whether it's via mail or phone, it's going to happen the more you participate.
That sort of goes standard rule for everything. The more you put in, the more you get out, right?
I think so.
I agree.
I think so.
I think that that's right, but it's appealing to me what you were saying, Jeff, about busting the paradigm a little bit, because I feel like a really important role that the League of Women Voters plays is not just educating voters. Obviously, that's very important, but it's also enabling voters through voter registration, through talking to people who aren't voting. Why aren't you voting? Is it because you haven't had a chance to interact with the people that are on the ballot in a way that matters to you? Is it because you don't feel heard on an issue? How can we get you more engaged in the process? And so I feel like by providing fora like this, where people can come meet the candidates, ask them questions, form an opinion that either will motivate them because they really agree or even because they really disagree, to show up at the polls and have their voice be heard. I think that that's really important. And to me, that's what solves the statistic that you started with about voter turnout, is getting more people to care about the process who haven't necessarily before for whatever reason. And it's not a one-size-fits-all. That's why we come up with a sort of suite of programming to try to reach as many people as we can where they are and get them from being non-voters to being voters.
And not only feel like they can participate in the process, but that they have the power to make change is really going to get more people involved. And if you want to see the power to make change, start at the city level. I also just because I love history, I want to make clear that the League of Women Voters was started when women got the right to vote. It is an organization from its very inception that has been dedicated to first-time voters and new voters and getting more people involved. This is not something that is brand new. This is not a new idea. This is something that the League has been working on from the very beginning. It's one of the reasons that it's such a unique, it occupies such a unique space in our political landscape.
Absolutely.
Not only is it steeped in tradition, but it is always bringing new people in. That's why you'll find the League of Women Voters at immigration and naturalization ceremonies, getting first-time citizens registered to vote. And that's why you'll see the League of Women Voters doing interesting and innovative ideas to reach new voters who have had the right to vote for a long time and perhaps have never exercised it.
Yeah, that's right. Now, that's actually a good segue point into one of the other projects we're going to be working on this year. And this one was really your brainchild, Jeff. And we were talking about how a conversation with Dr. Bob Stein at Rice had a really tremendous impact on you. Why don't you talk to us about that?
Oh gosh, every conversation I have with Bob Stein has a tremendous impact. He's a pretty amazing guy. There's a couple of projects that have come out of conversations with Dr. Stein. One of them is we have 2 summer interns from Rice, one of whom came from his group, working on breaking the model and figuring out, like, what do people care about? What will motivate a non-voter to vote? Because the candidates aren't doing this research. They're not funding things like that. They're going after the surefire vote. But there's a lot of challenges, and I think that around this table, we're all pretty optimistic. We're rays of sunshine here in a slightly cynical political world. The truth is that the data shows that getting out the vote is a very, very, very difficult thing to do. It's hard to move the needle. So we have the luxury of an inside view into maybe what the next generation is going to care about. Maybe somebody doesn't care about potholes, they care about air quality. And the #1 issue in this election, as far as I can see, is traffic. How does traffic and air quality tie together, or how do traffic and bicycle safety tie together? It's very interesting to watch people reframe this conversation. So we have 2 interns who are doing research around those issues. One of them is essentially developing business cases around what's the cost of reaching certain types of potential voters. And one of them is doing a series of collateral, from coasters to tokens to mock voting, where it's polling Houstonians about what they care about. And we're trying to figure out, well, who are we talking to? Are these lifelong Houstonians? Are these people who've moved here in the last few years? And what do they care about? Why do they vote? And it's very interesting as we put things out there that are maybe shocking statistics, like a 13% voter turnout rate, or statistics about our pensions that hamstring city government from being able to do everything that it quite aspires to do. As we put those things out there and we educate Houstonians about what their government does, you start to see a change. You start to see a shift in perception around the city. So these 2 interns are really focused on that little 1%, that innovation point, where they're just trying to figure out, how do you reach people who care about very hyper-specific issues, either to their neighborhood or something that's totally transcendent, like the environment or technology.
So, and talk to us a little bit about the outputs that you expect from the projects that these 2 interns are working on. Because the idea is that they're producing data and information that can be used to reach these either disenfranchised voters or new voters or whomever it might be that we're trying to get to show up at the polls.
For sure. So one thing that they're doing right now is building out a scalable program where we are going to request volunteers to come in and run little pop-up polls. They tested it about 3 weeks ago at Pop Shop Houston, and it was a resounding success. It was very interesting to see people, how they would engage with these questions, like, what Houston celebrity would you vote for as mayor? Surprisingly, it's Bun B. But there's also serious questions.
Or not surprisingly.
Like, yeah, he edged out Beyonce just a little bit, but they also ask some tough questions, like, do you vote based on identity politics, or do you vote based on issues? And these are questions that strike to the heart of why people show up to the polls, or as Bob Stein would say, present to the polls. And I think what we're all working on together is trying to solve that first half of registration and presentation to the polls. And where I think the league, where it's a natural handoff, is that the league really serves to educate them and to make sure that voters are voting with their brains.
Yeah. So we actually have someone on the phone. Caller, welcome to Public Affairs, Public Access. Tell us what your name is and what your question is.
My name is James, and I'd like to talk about the way politicians use government agencies towards what I'm talking about is the Texas Medical Board is that's the Texas Board of Medical Examiners. These are supposed to be the police of doctors. Now, but we currently know that it's a stooge organization for Lieutenant Governor Patrick. The Texas Medical Board has outlawed what do they call it? The telemedicine. Like if you're 800 miles away in West Texas, you can access an expert in the medical center via the internet. Now, I don't know what happened. Perhaps somebody issued a Plan B prescription for the abortion pill. Thus, we no longer have telemedicine. And how can you get to these guys? I think a couple of things might be helpful is no longer name a public building after a living politician. Also,
very interesting idea, and it's something that I think that we should talk about in terms of what organizations are under state jurisdiction and which organizations are under the city and what are federal. And we're in an interesting time right now in the city elections. So thank you so much for calling in and bringing that up. Yeah. I think that this raises an interesting point, the caller does, which is there are certain agencies that have a lot of power and will make decisions for folks based on their ideology, but that those agencies and those people are at all different levels.
And they'll try to obfuscate the process, the decision-making process. But the beautiful thing about this country is we have the Freedom of Information Act. And what I would suggest to the caller is filing a FOIA request to that department to try to better understand what was the logic behind the telemedicine decision. I'm not personally familiar with it, but when push comes to shove, the data shows the full story. So that's what I would encourage him to do.
I think that's right, Jeff. And to me, that underscores the importance of involvement and accessibility, and why the idea of giving people a chance to interact with the candidates for the offices that they care about is a really exciting project for this year.
For sure.
So before we had our call, Jeff, you were talking to us about data outputs in terms of figuring out some of the answers to these questions that your crack interns are working on.
They're
for
amazing.
us and for Dr. Stein. Well, I've spent a good amount of time with one of them, and she blew me away. So yeah. I believe you about the other one. But so, can you talk to us about for this election cycle, because your interns are tackling big issues, yes, and their outputs are going to extend far beyond 2015. Yes. So what is it that you're hoping to be able to take from what they're doing and show to voters in this election cycle that might be helpful in their decision making? Absolutely.
Well, I'm hopeful that they will come across something that changes the game a little bit, but an investment in innovation isn't necessarily an investment in an outcome. So I want to be careful saying we're holding back some grand revelation that's going to change the game. But I do think over time, if you study this longitudinally, you're going to start to see attitudes shift and change. Much like Stephen Kleinberg does with his Houston area survey, we've seen Houston and the dynamics and the demographics of Houston change over time. I think it will be very interesting to see as Houston changes, as its infrastructure changes, as the quality of life changes, what are the trade-offs that we make, and what does Generation Y, Generation Z, whatever you want to call it, what do the younger people care about? Because in 15, 20 years, those younger people who are just turning 18 right now are going to be my age, and they're going to be in the middle age of their career, and they're going to start to inherit this city and have a responsibility for it. So it'd be good to know what they care about now.
Absolutely. And just for viewers at home, one of the other fantastic projects that that Jeff has started for us and we hope to watch grow is a new website called Houston.vote. The website is up. It's a brand new baby website, but as projects like the collateral campaign and some of these other data points that Jeff is collecting come to fruition, you'll watch that website grow with more information. It should be very exciting. It's also going to integrate some of the information that you know and love from vote411.org. So just check it out from time to time. Over the course of this election cycle, you're going to watch some pretty exciting things happen on Houston.vote. So one of the other things that I'm actually really excited about is kind of a intersection between civic and art, and this is something that Amy started with a completely different kind of mural earlier this year. Why don't you tell the folks at home a little bit about your Give mural and sort of what's next with the league and your next iteration?
Sure. So in December, there's a movement for Giving Tuesday, and on Giving Tuesday, everyone in America sort of looks towards how they can give. It's right before the end of the year, so there's a convenient New Year's resolution vibe going on. There's also a nice tax incentive happening, and my agency was looking at this holiday and thinking, this is really great, but we should really be thinking about giving year-round. So we launched a series of Give murals throughout Houston on Giving Tuesday, announced them, and then started rolling them out. There's 6 now around Houston in different neighborhoods throughout the city. And what we were trying to do is launch a conversation that would allow people to talk about giving year-round and not just on that one particular day. We wanted to use a hashtag in order to be able to give people the opportunity to have that conversation online, but to give them something very tangible and visible out in the community that was offline, that would allow them to express themselves and talk about how they were giving back in the community, the nonprofits that they were giving to, the ways that they were getting involved in their community, and to share that and to really start a movement around that would last all year long. And it's really caught on. If you search the hashtag GiveHue, you can see that there are people who have tagged themselves in pictures all over Houston and talked about the ways that they're getting involved, people that appreciate the art, but that people that also just really want to do something to make the community better. So we wanted to transfer that energy over into the idea of driving people to vote and to talk about voting, people that are passionate about being engaged civically, but then also people who are trying to find their way in that pathway. So there will be a series of murals in conjunction with Up Art Studio, who is helping us to curate the artists involved, and we'll be spreading those throughout Houston, anywhere we can find a wall and have that visibility. Yeah, let us know if you have a wall. That's one of the most difficult parts about launching a mural project, is finding the walls. So please let us know if you have a wall. But the idea is just to create that tangibility out in the community, that visibility out in the community, and to ignite a spark that will bring conversation around the topic. So
I love that you started this Give campaign and so many people responded, and that you want to push this into the voting space, because millennials are the most engaged generation in terms of charity work, volunteer work. They're more likely to be involved in their community and community organizations than their parents were. But people look at voting numbers and assume that millennials don't care about their community, and it's just not true. Pushing this into the voting space will show people that this is a very important and interesting and exciting way to give back. I mean, helping decide your leadership is an amazing way to give back to your community. It's a really important way, but it's also you set the priorities, and if you don't think that that's giving back, look at the budget and look at the way that money gets spent. There's a lot of money that gets decided, and if it doesn't get decided based on your priorities, then you're not giving in the way that you could be. So I'm also just personally very curious about the artists and about the way that this will come about. I think that the personality here. What can you say anything more about who might be doing this, or the type of folks that might be involved, or is that still are you looking for folks to get involved?
I think we're always looking for volunteers and for people to be involved. We're definitely looking for real estate. Wall-wise, Up Art Studio is already pounding the pavement to find the right visibility. One of the biggest struggles in a mural project is that you want to have diversity and you want to be in a variety of neighborhoods so that the visibility is really reaching the cultural aspects of the city. So I think that's one of our biggest struggles, and just knowing that we want to make sure that we've covered all of the neighborhoods that we can in Houston. As far as the artists, we're leaning towards an artist, but I think we're also open-minded about making this an inclusive project. And if there are a number of artists that want to participate, we're certainly open to including everyone we can on the project. So we're still kind of working on that aspect of it, but there will definitely be a lot of creativity coming to the project, a lot of cultural diversity, and like I said, as much exposure as we can possibly get throughout the neighborhoods of Houston.
That's wonderful.
So just to be really clear, if you happen to be a business owner somewhere in Houston and you happen to have some blank walls, we want to hear from you. Now, but here's what I love about what I loved about the Give murals, and then what I love about the voting murals is that you can make it really personal. Like I've spent some time on the Give hashtag, and people would show up and take their pictures different places for a lot of different reasons, because they're trying to draw attention to the cause that they care about, or because they just want to encourage other people to be giving. And I feel like you have a lot of that same synergy with a vote mural, because people who do show up at the polls for such a wide array of reasons, right? Either they really care about an issue, or they really care about a candidate, or maybe some combination of both. Maybe they really, really hate a candidate, and so they'll show up at the polls just to vote against that person. Right. I feel like having that mural gives people a chance to talk about the fact that they're voting, but also why. This is why I care, you know.
So, yeah, one of the most important aspects of engagement is self-expression, especially in a world where we're so connected, and where the population is more and more engaged in self-aware and expressing what's important to them. So I think the murals gives a great opportunity for a beautiful backdrop for self-expression, where people can voice what they care about in a positive way, in a negative way, and then they can connect to other people who are passionate about those same issues. I think that's a great point, just hitting on that. It's one of the highlights of the project is just that it's not about what we think. It's not us putting that broadcast message out. Again, it's giving people an opportunity to engage talk about what they care about and connect to others that care about those same things.
So with this project and also with some of the more tech-based projects that you're working on, Jeff, I'm curious, because you're both sort of steeped in your respective communities, do you feel like taking the voting message into that community gets people who might not otherwise be interested in voting talking about voting? Like with the creative community, do you feel like working on this particular project would maybe bring you voters that haven't been engaged in the past? And the same question in the tech space.
Well, in the tech space, I'm not really sure, because technologists tend to stay away from bureaucracies at all costs, especially entrepreneurs, because it gets in the way of getting things done quickly, which is kind of the goal. What I really love about the vote murals is that, in my mind, the purpose of civic art is to surprise, it's to confront, it's to challenge the everyday. And there's something really interesting about when you're driving down the street and then suddenly this side of a building now says vote, or it says give, and suddenly you start to notice these things and you start to predict when it's going to come. You start to look forward to these murals. I think that injecting the concept of democracy and the idea that you can vote into the everyday life, into the public space, is also quite subversive. Houstonians don't talk about politics. I learned that from your newsletter. Houstonians don't talk about politics with one another. So how else are you going to remind people that it's an election year than to put 4 letters on a wall?
And let's be clear, this is the perfect election year to start talking about politics, because there's a lot at stake with the future of our city. But this is also an election in which a lot of the topics that, some of us might not be comfortable talking about, some of the, hot button social issues are not going to come up. This is a time for us to talk about what's going to make our city a better place to live, and what you think your neighbors and your family and your coworkers and the people that you go to church, temple, or mosque with, what they think the best that Houston can be, and the way in the city that they want to see. And those are topics that certainly there will be heated debate, and certainly there will be something that you disagree on. It's possible, but it's good practice for agreeing and disagreeing agreeably. Because it's about your own personal idea, and that's going to be incredibly important. I just want to share a personal story with this vote mural. Is that when I was living in Latin America, when it was time for an election, every single space and every surface was covered with a party or a candidate. Everywhere you went, there was a logo or something covering, if it was a rock on the side of a hill or if it was a convenience store. So in terms of the spaces, I just want to suggest to people that you might think that this is something that you have to have a big wall for, or in a prominent place, or maybe it's a wall that's smaller and a hidden gem that people can go find and explore. Just be creative. In other countries, if there is a spot to support your candidate, people will use it. So let's get into that. Let's get into the spirit of that.
Just don't break the law.
That's right. Nobody here is endorsing vandalism.
That's
However, John's point is well taken, because I have actually spent a good number of election cycles in the Philippines over the last decade, and it's the same. I mean, you can't go into a public space without having it papered with this candidate or that candidate, what they stand for, what they believe in. It's everywhere, and frankly, their turnout at the polls is significantly higher, and I do wonder if it's because it's just so on everyone's mind.
It's part of the public
election
discourse.
Season. Right. You can't not know that the elections are going on. Yeah. No, I absolutely. So
I think that's important, and I think that it's important that we all acknowledge that getting out the vote is not a new campaign idea. But what is important to also note is that nothing is working so far, and we have the opportunity to change that. So whatever we have to do, let's not stop talking about it, and let's put murals up, and let's put a website up, and let's do these projects, because we have got to have more people understand that they need to be weighing in on these decisions, especially the people that care about the future of this city.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And you know, one of the other projects that we want to talk about tonight kind of goes back to the whole. We're all talking about, you know, we need to turn this tide because we're talking about our future, and there's nothing that's more important to our future than our children. And you know, Jeff, you and I were at a breakfast where we heard, you know, Dr. Stein talking about it's a learned behavior. If you don't come from a home where there's an emphasis put on voting, the odds are it's not going to be a priority to you. And I can tell you, you know, personally for me, I'm very jealous of John's upbringing because I grew up in a place where my parents, grandparents, great-grandparents did not vote. Most of my friends didn't talk about voting. People weren't even active in student council, for goodness sake. It wasn't until I got to UT and was surrounded by people who were much more civically engaged that I started thinking about voting. And the first times I did it, I wasn't an informed voter. I you know, voted based on who everyone else was voting for, and you know, it's not the way I want my son to be civically engaged. So that's why, you know, he's 5. I've taken him to the polls 4 times in his life.
Awesome.
And I think that's really important. I want him to know that, you know, that this matters. And so the last project that we're talking about is very focused on the next generation and sort of changing this tide. So why don't you talk about that for us, Jeff?
For sure. So as you said, Rita, voting is learned behavior. The best way to predict a future voter is if their parents vote. And so we were all at this breakfast together, swapping ideas, and I came back to the office and I thought, man, it'd be great if we had parents take your kids to the polls just so they could see how it's done. When I was 13, my mom took me to the Clinton Bush election, presidential election, and I went in with her to vote, and I thought it was strange. I'm not supposed to be here, but I learned how the process worked. And I aired that out with one of our interns, Brian Barr, and he's so smart. He just flipped the script and he says, well, it would be great if we had kids taking their parents to the polls. What if we made a direct appeal to the kids? And it just so happened, it just so turned out through serendipity that I was having breakfast with the superintendent of Yes Prep the next day. So at this point, what we're doing is we're reaching out to school directors from public schools in Houston and pitching them a program. It's essentially kids take your parents to the polls, and we're looking at different ways in which we can educate kids about the voting process and about civics, and then have the ask be, ask your parents to take you to the polls. And there are children in the city who will be future voters, and their parents can't vote for one reason or another. And maybe they can't vote yet if they were 18 for one reason or another, but we're looking at substitute activities and things that mimic the act of voting so that they can start early. I would really hope that this is a lesson that they carry with them the same way your lessons carried with you, John, same way you remember actively not being involved as a kid. I think those memories are pretty powerful, and if we can help create some of them, hopefully we'll help create some future voters.
Not only are those memories powerful, but we all know that learn as I do is much more powerful than learn as I say. So it's going to create a really interesting conversation. We also know that the power of children and persuasion and power of young people is incredibly persuasive. I mean, not everybody ends up at Disneyland because they really thought that it would be a good idea. Quite often there's a child in their household that's saying, please, 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 you know,
Yeah.
can we go to Disneyland? And not everybody eats chicken nuggets for dinner because they thought that would be a great healthy choice. So we know that we've seen evidence of that. We've also seen evidence of the power of young people in the political sphere. I mean, this year alone, everyone from a Republican governor in Arkansas crediting his son for changing his mind about a particular LGBT rights or that particular issue. That was something that not everyone expected, but he credited his son. President Obama has credited college Republicans and young Democrats for changing his mind on particular issues that are important to young people. So they being the politicians and the elected officials and our leaders, give credit to young people. So we should empower them. We should educate them. We should give them a shot. And when we say that it's important to, you know, if your parent didn't go to college, then everyone thinks it's a good idea to teach that child about going to college, and that maybe the parent's not going to be able to be the best voice for that we need to offer that parent assistance in helping their child make that choice. But very rarely do you hear, well, the parent's not a voter. Well, that's up to the parents. I mean, we as a community really need to step up.
And I think we have to be extraordinarily careful with the message that we impart. Because again, one of the things I love about working with the League is that it is nonpartisan and that it's education focused. If we are fortunate enough to work with many different public schools in Houston, we're going to need help figuring out a way to balance the message of voting in particular and ways in which we can essentially have it appeal to children who want to learn these things, not necessarily to do anything other than make the information available.
Absolutely. And that information will be available at vote411.org and houston.vote. So there's going to be all kinds of resources for folks to get this information and share and learn. No one's asking you to make an ignorant decision. We are actually asking you to get involved, learn a little bit. Frankly, it's not a lot of homework. You know, it's not a thesis. It's a little bit of homework to learn to make a decision that you're going to feel comfortable with.
That's right. And just for those of you at home who might not be familiar with vote411.org, it is the digitized version of the League of Women Voters voter guide, which the League has been putting out literally for decades. And the way it works is we send a series of questions to every candidate on the ballot, and then we publish their answers to you. So when you search by zip code, it shows you what races that you're going to be voting in and what each candidate has to say for themselves. Because the idea is we want you to be making the decision who you agree with, who you don't agree with, and then voting accordingly. What I love about this idea is kids can be really blank slates for good ideas. And so when you put in front of a kid information, they say, I agree with this, I don't agree with this, and they can make that decision absent the baggage that so many adults bring to politics. So I'm a Republican, my father was a Republican, my grandfather was a Republican. Kids don't think that way. Kids will look at it and make a decision, and I almost wonder if empowering kids with that information might change minds of parents who have been doing it the same way for how many decades, and maybe they're voting in a way they don't even necessarily agree with because they're not informed that parties change too and candidates change too. So that's one thing I love about the idea is how many kids might just surprise their parents with how much they know and maybe even change some minds like what John is talking about.
I know that it's going to be an awesome tool to get more children engaged and get more parents engaged. And if even my parents who know a lot about these things, one of the hardest things that you could ask them, the hardest things to do is explain these different concepts to a child. And having a child ask about these things really will challenge parents to think deeper about why they do or don't do things for the community in different ways, and whether that's vote or not vote, or if a child asks a parent, why don't you vote? I would love to see that. I would love to see what happens there, because explaining to your child why you do or don't do something, well, it's not the duty of every parent to explain every action. Does get everyone thinking.
Mm-hmm. So I feel like part of the reason why so many millennials are active in the volunteer space is because they have been brought up on the idea that they can make a difference. And what I would love to see is for the next generation to believe that about the civic space, that by being engaged and intelligently choosing who represents them at all levels, but particularly at the local level, that's very important. I would love to see the next generation empowered to think, I make a difference. That's why I show up at the polls, because I make a difference. Because I think, especially, my parents' generation, so many of them feel like, well, my vote doesn't matter. I'm in a red state, or I'm in a blue state, or I'm in a whatever, and so it doesn't matter. I would love for my son not to ever feel that way, and to really think, I show up because I matter, and the minute we all start thinking we don't matter is the minute our country is really in trouble. Mm-hmm. So we have just a few minutes left, and I think what I would like to do is just go around the table really quickly, and what I want to hear is, you know, if you if all of these projects, which I'm very excited about, are raging success, what's the one outcome you would love to see in this 2015 election? And you can't say just more people at the polls, because that's what we all want. So what would be an indicator to you that we have really gotten onto something?
Well, I think it's pretty well settled what the topics of conversation are going to be for the candidates. So if we're successful, we're going to broaden those topics of conversation. We're going to stop only talking about traffic, and we're going to talk about all the things that surround traffic and all the things that surround those things, and hone in on the issues that Houstonians care about. And traffic being one of them, but it would be very interesting to see candidates talk about things like the environment or things like technology that other Houstonians care about.
Amy?
I would love to see everyone who understands the value of voting, who does vote, decide to become an ambassador for getting others to vote. I'd like to see us all do whatever we have to get attention and make the value known of why we believe in voting. I think that takes the diverts the attention from the candidate being the one to entice people to vote. It makes it all more bipartisan. It makes it all more about the community, and that creates an army of ambassadors around the idea of voting, of people who understand and get it and can bring more power to the space.
I would love for everyone to look at election night results in the same way we look at the last 5 minutes of a Texans game, with as much excitement and anticipation about who will win and who will lose. Whether or not you're able to vote, whether or not you're old enough to vote, whether or not you're eligible to vote, and hopefully if you are eligible to vote, you're going to get out there and vote. But the baseline, y'all, is if we could just get everyone to have a choice and a preference to decide about who they're rooting for, I think would be an awesome and wonderful addition to this community, so that when election night comes and we're watching those results come in, we're all cheering for our team to get the most points.
Well, we are fresh out of time, and I can't believe an hour went so fast. But on behalf of League of Women Voters and Houston Media Source, I'd like to thank Jeff Reichman and Amy Woodall for joining us tonight. And on behalf of my co-host, John Korchinski, and myself, Rita Hicks, I want to thank you for tuning in. And we look forward to seeing you at the polls this year. For additional information about your elections, you can check out the League's Facebook page or our partners' Facebook pages. And for information about your candidates, visit vote411.org and continue to check in at houston.vote. Some exciting things are going to be happening there.